The conference room buzzed with an electric tension that made the fluorescent lights seem to flicker. Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched her presentation folder, the carefully prepared quarterly report now feeling like lead in her hands. Across the polished mahogany table, her boss, Mr. Thompson, stood with his back to the whiteboard, his face flushed crimson. "You call this work?" His voice cracked through the silence like a whip, causing the 3 junior interns seated beside Sarah to flinch visibly. "After all these years, this is what you bring to the table? Sloppy numbers, incomplete projections, this isn't just incompetence, it's willful negligence." Sarah's throat tightened as she tried to respond, but the words caught somewhere between her racing heart and her dry lips. The numbers weren't sloppy, they were precise to the 3rd decimal point. She had spent 3 sleepless nights cross-checking every figure, anticipating every possible question. But none of that mattered now, not when Mr. Thompson was building up to one of his infamous tirades. "I've given you chance after chance," he continued, pacing along the length of the table like a predator circling its prey. "But your performance has been consistently subpar. Frankly, I don't know why we kept you on this long." He paused dramatically, letting his words hang in the air like a thick fog. Behind her, Sarah could hear the soft rustle of papers as the interns shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Her stomach churned as she watched Mr. Thompson reach for the termination letter he'd already prepared, sealed in its official company envelope. This wasn't just about her job anymore, it was about dismantling her professional identity piece by piece, in front of colleagues who barely knew her name. Her eyes darted to the corner of the room where a security camera blinked its mechanical eye, recording every humiliating moment. Effective immediately, Mr. Thompson began, but Sarah's mind was already racing ahead. She remembered the late nights she had spent in this very office, the weekend sacrifice to meet impossible deadlines, the constant pressure to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. And now, after 5 years of loyal service, this was how it ended, not with gratitude or even basic professional courtesy, but with public execution. As Mr. Thompson's voice droned on, detailing her supposed failures, Sarah's gaze fell upon the framed diploma hanging on his wall. It had always seemed slightly off to her, the font too modern, the seal placement unusual for a prestigious institution like Harvard Business School. In that moment of crystalline clarity, as her career crumbled before her eyes, Sarah realized something far more devastating than her own termination. Her boss's entire persona might be built on a foundation of lies. The memory of countless microaggressions and subtle manipulations flooded back to Sarah as she sat frozen in her chair. There was the time he had taken credit for her innovative marketing strategy during the annual shareholders meeting, or when he conveniently forgot to forward her promotion recommendation to upper management. Each incident had felt like a paper cut at the time, annoying but manageable, but together they formed a pattern of calculated cruelty that had slowly eroded her confidence. What struck Sarah most painfully was how Mr. Thompson had masterfully played to her insecurities. He knew exactly which buttons to press, the lingering self-doubt from being a first-generation college graduate, the fear of not measuring up to colleagues from more privileged backgrounds. His words weren't just meant to criticize her work, they were designed to dismantle her sense of self-worth. The way he emphasized after all these years wasn't just a statement about her tenure, it was a reminder of every missed opportunity, every promotion she hadn't received because he'd strategically positioned himself as the gatekeeper to her success. The presence of the junior staff made the humiliation exponentially worse. These were the same interns she had mentored, the ones she had helped navigate their first corporate experiences. Just last week, she had stayed late to help Emily prepare for her first major presentation, sharing tips she had learned through years of trial and error. Now those same young professionals were witnessing her complete professional annihilation, their wide eyes reflecting the stark reality that loyalty and hard work counted for nothing against raw power. Sarah's chest tightened as she noticed Emily discreetly texting under the table, probably documenting the spectacle for her friends. The digital age had transformed workplace humiliations into viral content, and she could already imagine the water-cooler conversations that would follow. Worse still was the knowledge that this public firing would become part of her permanent professional record, a black mark that would follow her to every future interview. As Mr. Thompson continued his verbal assault, Sarah found herself focusing on the smallest details, the way his expensive watch caught the light, the perfectly pressed crease in his trousers. These symbols of corporate success suddenly seemed grotesque, bought and maintained through the systematic destruction of others' careers. Her own tailored blazer, once a source of pride, now felt like a costume she had worn while performing for an audience that never truly valued her contributions. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about performance metrics or quarterly reports. Mr. Thompson had chosen this moment, this setting, specifically to demonstrate his dominance, not just over her, but over everyone in the room. By tearing down someone who had once been considered a rising star, he was sending a clear message to the next generation of employees. Loyalty would be punished, ambition would be crushed, and questioning authority would result in public disgrace. Sarah's thoughts turned to the countless hours she had invested in building relationships within the company, only to have them weaponized against her. The networking events she had attended, the extra projects she had volunteered for, the weekends spent mentoring younger colleagues, all of it had been meticulously catalogued by Mr. Thompson, not as evidence of dedication, but as ammunition for moments like this. The sickening irony was that her very commitment to the company had made her more vulnerable, more expendable. As the termination letter landed on the table with a final definitive thud, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating awareness. She had spent years playing by the rules, believing that hard work and integrity would eventually be recognized. Now she understood that in this particular game, the rules were written by people like Mr. Thompson, people who viewed others' successes as threats to their own power. The framed diploma on the wall seemed to mock her from across the room. That single, seemingly insignificant detail had triggered a cascade of memories, late-night observations about Mr. Thompson's unusually vague responses when questioned about his education, the way he skillfully redirected conversations about his background to safer topics. Sarah recalled the time she had accidentally discovered an old LinkedIn profile while researching a project, one that showed a different educational history before it was mysteriously updated. At the time, she had dismissed it as a simple mistake, but now the pieces were falling into place with alarming clarity. Her mind raced through the implications as Mr. Thompson continued his performance. If his credentials were indeed fabricated, then everything, the promotions, the corner office, the authority he wielded so recklessly, was built on a foundation of deception. The weight of this realization pressed against her chest, mixing with the humiliation of her public termination to create a potent cocktail of anger and determination. Sarah's fingers twitched against the edge of the conference table as she mentally catalogued every suspicious detail she had observed over the years. There were the technical terms he consistently mispronounced during meetings, the way he deferred to her expertise on subjects he should have mastered during his supposed Ivy League education. Even his management style, which oscillated between micromanagement and complete disengagement, suggested someone compensating for fundamental gaps in knowledge and experience. The security camera in the corner caught her attention again, its red light blinking steadily. How many similar scenes had it recorded? How many other careers had been destroyed in this exact spot, justified by lies built on fraudulent foundations? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, not from fear, but from the growing certainty that she held the key to exposing a much larger injustice. As Mr. Thompson finally concluded his speech and gestured for security to escort her out, Sarah forced herself to maintain composure. Inside, however, a plan was forming, one that would require every ounce of courage and strategic thinking she had developed during her years in corporate warfare. The termination letter might represent the end of her employment, but it could also serve as the beginning of something far more significant, the exposure of a fraud who had built his empire on stolen credentials and shattered careers. The walk to her desk felt like moving through molasses, each step heavier than the last as the weight of her decisions settled firmly in her chest. Colleagues who had once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact, their faces masks of awkward discomfort. She methodically packed her belongings into a cardboard box, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the framed photo of her parents. Their proud smiles seemed to waver in the harsh fluorescent light, reminding her of everything she had worked for, and everything she refused to let be taken away without a fight. Sitting alone in the empty conference room later that evening, Sarah pulled out her laptop and began the painstaking process of gathering evidence. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed archived emails, performance reviews, and project documentation she had meticulously saved over the years. Each file represented a piece of the puzzle she was determined to solve, a testament to both her own achievements and her boss's increasingly desperate attempts to undermine them. The discovery of Mr. Thompson's questionable credentials had ignited a fire within her, a burning need to understand how deeply this deception ran through the organization. She started with publicly available information, cross-referencing graduation records and alumni databases. The discrepancies she found were subtle but telling: dates that didn't align, missing publications he claimed to have authored, professional affiliations that couldn't be verified. Each new piece of information fueled her resolve, transforming her initial shock into something more powerful: purpose. As she delved deeper, Sarah began connecting dots she had previously dismissed as coincidences. The sudden departures of several senior managers who had questioned Mr. Thompson's decisions, the pattern of high-performing employees being pushed out just as they gained enough influence to challenge him, the carefully orchestrated narrative of his supposed brilliance that dominated company lore. It wasn't just about fake credentials, it was about a culture of fear and manipulation that had infected the entire organization. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from concerned colleagues, each one offering variations of the same advice: let it go, it's not worth it, you'll never work in this industry again if you pursue this. But with each warning, her determination only grew stronger. She created encrypted backup files of everything she found, storing them in multiple secure locations. The risk was monumental, but the alternative, letting this injustice stand unchallenged, felt infinitely worse. Late into the night, as the building emptied around her, Sarah found herself staring at the termination letter still sitting on her desk. The official-looking document had transformed in her eyes from a symbol of defeat into a catalyst for change. She methodically documented every interaction, every email, every policy violation she had witnessed or experienced. The spreadsheet grew longer with each passing hour, categories multiplying as patterns emerged: favoritism, harassment, financial irregularities, and most damning of all, the systematic marginalization of anyone who threatened Mr. Thompson's carefully constructed facade. Her research led her to former employees who had left under mysterious circumstances, many of whom were surprisingly willing to share their stories once they understood her intentions. Some had moved on to better opportunities, while others had left the industry entirely, their confidence shattered by similar experiences. Their collective accounts painted a picture far more disturbing than Sarah had initially imagined, a web of deceit that extended beyond individual careers to affect company policies, client relationships, and even stock performance. As dawn approached, Sarah found herself facing the most difficult decision yet. The evidence she had gathered was substantial, but taking action would require more than just courage. It would demand sacrifices she wasn't sure she was ready to make. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she composed an anonymous email to HR, outlining her findings and attaching carefully selected documents. Each word felt like stepping off a cliff, committing herself to a course of action that could either vindicate her or destroy what remained of her professional reputation. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using the same tactics she had once condemned: manipulating information, playing corporate politics, leveraging secrets for personal gain. Yet somehow, this felt different. This wasn't about revenge or personal advancement, it was about justice, about protecting future employees from suffering the same fate she had endured. As she hit send on the email, Sarah felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration, knowing she had just set in motion events that would change everything, for better or worse. The days following her bold move felt like living in suspended animation. Sarah alternated between checking her encrypted email account obsessively and forcing herself to stay offline completely. Every notification sound sent her heart racing, half expecting either a legal threat or confirmation that her evidence had been received. Meanwhile, she maintained a carefully constructed facade of normalcy when interacting with former colleagues who called to check on her, neither confirming nor denying anything about her current activities. Her investigation had expanded beyond Mr. Thompson's credentials to include a comprehensive audit of his professional conduct. She discovered patterns of financial irregularities that suggested embezzlement, manipulated performance reviews that systematically marginalized potential rivals, and a network of intimidated employees who had been coerced into maintaining his facade of competence. Each new revelation solidified her conviction that this wasn't just about one man's deception, it was about protecting an entire organization from rotting from within. The psychological toll manifested in unexpected ways. Sleep became elusive, her mind constantly replaying the humiliation of her termination while simultaneously strategizing her next moves. She found herself analyzing every interaction, every casual conversation, for potential allies or threats. The isolation was palpable, even her closest friends struggled to understand the depth of her commitment to exposing the truth. Why not just move on? They would ask, unable to grasp that walking away would feel like betraying every value she held dear. Yet amidst the stress and uncertainty, Sarah discovered reservoirs of strength she never knew she possessed. The fear that had once paralyzed her transformed into a focused determination. She developed meticulous protocols for handling evidence, created redundant backup systems, and established communication channels that couldn't be traced back to her. Each precautionary measure became a small victory against the system that had sought to crush her spirit. Her mornings began with detailed research sessions, poring over financial reports and organizational charts. Afternoons were dedicated to reaching out to former employees, piecing together a timeline of Mr. Thompson's ascent through the company ranks. Evenings found her composing carefully worded memos to HR, each one revealing another layer of the corruption she had uncovered. The process was agonizingly slow, but necessary. Rushing could jeopardize everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The most challenging aspect proved to be managing her emotions. Anger at the injustice she had suffered warred with compassion for those still trapped in the toxic environment she had escaped. Guilt about breaking confidences competed with the moral imperative to protect future victims. She wrestled with these conflicting feelings during long walks through the city streets, finding solace in the anonymity of crowded sidewalks and the comforting rhythm of her footsteps. As weeks turned into months, Sarah's apartment transformed into a command center for corporate accountability. Sticky notes covered every available surface, color-coded to represent different aspects of her investigation. Whiteboards displayed complex relationship maps between key players in the company hierarchy. File cabinets overflowed with documented evidence, each piece carefully dated and annotated. What had started as a personal vendetta had evolved into a crusade for transparency and justice. She found herself particularly drawn to the stories of those who had been collateral damage in Mr. Thompson's rise to power. The talented manager who had left the company after being falsely accused of misconduct. The brilliant analyst whose ideas had been stolen and presented as his own. The promising young professional who had quit rather than endure the daily humiliation of working under such a toxic leader. Their voices echoed in her mind, fueling her determination to ensure their sacrifices wouldn't be in vain. The waiting game proved excruciating. Corporate bureaucracies moved at glacial speeds, and each day without response tested her resolve. She occupied herself by expanding her investigation, uncovering additional layers of corruption that extended beyond Mr. Thompson's immediate sphere of influence. Patterns emerged that suggested systemic issues within the company's leadership structure, raising questions about oversight and accountability at the highest levels. Despite the mounting evidence and growing network of allies, doubt occasionally crept in. Was she tilting at windmills, fighting a battle she couldn't possibly win? Could one person truly affect meaningful change in such an entrenched system? These questions haunted her quiet moments, threatening to undermine her carefully constructed plans. Yet each time she considered giving up, she remembered the look in the junior intern's eyes during her termination, the mixture of sympathy and fear that had passed between them. That memory alone was enough to steel her resolve and push forward, one carefully documented piece of evidence at a time. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Sarah's encrypted email pinged with an official response from HR, not the usual automated acknowledgement, but a carefully worded message requesting further documentation and promising confidentiality. The tone was formal yet urgent, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale. It wasn't victory yet, but it was validation that her evidence had struck a nerve. Over the next few weeks, the investigation snowballed. HR's initial skepticism gave way to alarm as they began independently verifying her claims. Financial auditors were brought in discreetly, combing through years of records. Former employees who had once feared retaliation now stepped forward, emboldened by the knowledge that their stories were being taken seriously. Even some current staff, including a few mid-level managers who had silently resented Mr. Thompson's leadership, began providing corroborating testimonies. Sarah watched from the sidelines, maintaining her anonymity while continuing to feed information to HR. She knew the risks. If her identity were exposed prematurely, the backlash could be devastating, but she also knew she couldn't stop now. Every late-night email, every painstakingly compiled spreadsheet, every whispered conversation with former colleagues felt like another brick laid in the foundation of justice. Then came the day when the company issued a brief internal memo announcing Mr. Thompson's temporary leave of absence pending an ongoing review. The wording was vague, but the subtext was clear: the walls were closing in. Within days, rumors spread throughout the office about discrepancies in his credentials and allegations of misconduct. For the first time, Sarah saw hope flicker in the eyes of her former colleagues. The fear that had gripped the workplace for so long began to loosen its hold. A month later, the board released a public statement. Mr. Thompson had been terminated, effective immediately, after an extensive investigation uncovered significant ethical violations, including falsified qualifications and financial mismanagement. The company vowed to implement sweeping reforms, including stricter oversight of executive appointments and stronger protections for whistleblowers. Sarah received a call from HR that evening. They didn't know her name, only that someone had provided critical evidence that led to the exposure. "Whoever you are," the voice on the other end said, "you've done this company, and its employees, a great service." She hung up the phone and stared out her window at the city skyline. The weight that had pressed on her chest for so long finally lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of satisfaction. Justice hadn't been swift or easy, but it had come. And though she would never seek recognition for what she'd done, she knew the truth mattered more than any accolades. The next morning, Sarah updated her resume. Her LinkedIn profile remained dormant, untouched since her termination, but she added a single line under her experience: advocate for integrity. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. As she walked out into the crisp autumn air, ready to face whatever came next, she realized something important. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving.